evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's debate. My name is Valen Powdy and I'm the chairman, and Jordan is the timekeeper. The adjudicator is Miss Luan. The topic for tonight's debate is that we should unfriend Facebook. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Nuriootpa High School, and the negative team seated to my left is from the Australian Science and Maths School. The speaking time for this debate is 8 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell may be rung 30 seconds after speaking time, in which the speaker must sit down immediately. Please ensure that your mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched off. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Rachel Golder.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chairman and fellow debaters. Welcome to this evening's debate. The topic for tonight is that we should unfriend Facebook, and we, the affirmative team, strongly believe this statement is true. We define the topic that we should unfriend Facebook to mean that we, Facebook users worldwide, should unfriend the social media giant Facebook by disconnecting from the network and taking a break from the site or deleting our accounts. Facebook primarily allows its users to befriend each other to view statuses or photos in a newsfeed. However, its features extend to include instant messaging, groups or event invitations. We would like to draw attention to the meaning of should as an indication of obligation or duty. We suggest and advise that it is in the best interests of the 2.23 billion Facebook users to delete their accounts. However, recognise it is unlikely this will occur, and hence it is not obligatory. Whilst Facebook has advantages, such as global connectivity, we, the affirmative team, believe that the reasons why you should unfriend Facebook clearly outweigh its benefits. In tonight's debate, we will delve into the reasons why we should unfriend Facebook and intend to look beyond the simple reasons, such as that it's a waste of time. Although it may be beneficial to similarly unfriend other social media networks, their positive and negative effects do not influence this debate, as it is focused exclusively on Facebook. As first speaker this evening, I'll be explaining to you the psychological and mental health repercussions of Facebook, as well as the antisocial behaviour it facilitates. Our second speaker, Jess, will talk to you about how Facebook invades users' privacy by unethically gaining and distributing personal data. The third affirmative speaker, Georgia, will refute the flaws in the opposition's arguments and sum up our team's case. Mark Zuckerberg, the creator of Facebook, originally intended the social network to be an online directory that connects people. However, through the way modern audiences utilise Facebook to interact with each other, this could not be further from the truth. Facebook is renowned for its newsfeed features that allow people to freely post pictures, videos, information or statuses. In late 2017, Facebook officially acknowledged that this passive information consumption left its users feeling worse psychologically. A former Facebook executive, Sean Parker, explained that Facebook's success and heavy usage is attributed to the dopamine-driven feedback loops that increase the hostility and mistruth online. Dopamine is the motivational, feel-good chemical our brain releases every time someone interacts with your post by liking or commenting. And although this sounds good in theory, this creates a constant need for validation and attention, clearly showing why it is in the best interests of Facebook users to unfriend the network, as it becomes extremely psychologically damaging and can even result in an addiction. On an MRI scan, a Facebook addiction possesses similar qualities to substance abuse or a gambling addiction, particularly in terms of the amygdala striatal brain activity, which is the component that controls the motivation, reinforcement and decision-making cognitive aspects. People are shallowly rewarded through Facebook interactions and fueled by envy. Your social success is determined by the number of likes or comments, as people are satisfied by appearing more popular, social and successful than their peers. However, this can become extremely socially toxic when it operates in the opposite direction through jealousy and dissatisfaction, which highlights how we should unfriend Facebook to maintain our own mental health and real-life relations with others. American university professors of public health undertook a study of over 5,200 adult Facebook users to measure the relationship between Facebook usage, life satisfaction and physical and mental health over 2 years. They found that as the study continued and the time on Facebook increased, the mean averages of each area decreased, forming a negative relation between how quality and quantity of Facebook usage detracts from more meaningful and healthy real-life experiences. Biology and Medical Research Group, Public Library of Science, conducted a study in 2013 where they messaged a group of participating Facebook users for 2 consecutive weeks to measure moment-to-moment happiness and life satisfaction. They found that heavier Facebook usage led to a decrease in these variables, as the time spent on the network directly took away from real-life experiences by creating a sense of isolation, which consequently made the participants feel worse psychologically and more lonely. These damaging psychological and mental health repercussions from Facebook usage highlights why it is truly in the best interests of Facebook users to unfriend the network. This leads into my second argument, that although Facebook is a social networking site, it prevents genuine personal social connections and facilitates dangerous antisocial behaviour. A study conducted by the American Journal of Preventive Medicine found that the more time spent on Facebook resulted in participants perceiving them to be socially isolated at a greater degree. Perceived social isolation is extremely harmful mentally, emotionally, and physically, particularly as there seems to be a cap on the number of friends the human brain can handle, and this requires in-person social interaction to actually maintain, showing how Facebook doesn't actually connect us at a psychological level. And not all Facebook connections are positive. It has become a tool for anonymity and crime, cyberbullying, predators, and identity fraud, which has led to sexual abuse, murder, or financial scams. Whilst many of these crimes can occur off of Facebook, unfriending Facebook reduces the likelihood of individuals falling victim to these crimes and to an extent can eliminate the anonymity. The Teens and Digital Citizenship Survey, undertaken by 800 teenagers, reported that a shocking 88% had witnessed cyberbullying or cruelty on Facebook. Cyberbullying on the network has resulted in numerous cases of teenage suicides. Michael Cleland, ambassador of the Bully Zero Foundation Australia, was the father of 18-year-old Jessica. Jess took her own life in 2014, where her parents observed no signs that anything was wrong prior to her suicide. Michael found 87 Facebook messages from two of her peers who relentlessly bullied her. Although suicides caused by cyberbullying is not directly Facebook's fault, the social media giant offers instant messaging and commenting facilities. Hence, these users should unfriend Facebook, as negative social interactions can reach and harm young people at all hours of their day in their own homes. The secrecy of the network system causes many cyberbullying victims to fight these battles privately without the knowledge, help and support of their parents, increasing the victims' feelings of isolation, which shows it is in the best interests of users to protect their safety to disconnect from the network. The Daily Mail report that the United Kingdom Police receive reports of crimes linked to Facebook every 40 minutes, which resulted in an average of 12,300 alleged Facebook offences annually. Facebook facilitates this extreme antisocial behaviour, as it only requires an active email account to create a new profile, making it extremely easy for child predators to pose as attractive, friendly, young people to meet with and manipulate young adolescents. In 2016, a 60-year-old man in Canberra created a fake Facebook profile to connect with a friend's 11-year-old daughter. He was sentenced to 2.5 years jail for a range of offences, including 2 acts of indecency when he met up with the young girl in person. The pair had exchanged hundreds of explicit messages, whilst the vulnerable 11-year-old was coerced into sending explicit pictures. Facebook's facilities exploit the vulnerability in young adolescents and children, which shows that users should unfriend Facebook to avoid compromising their safety by limiting dangerous online situations. Ladies and gentlemen, Facebook has become a tool that facilitates addiction and evidently worsens psychological well-being, whilst increasing the amount of potentially dangerous situations young people are exposed to. Without Facebook, users would have the opportunity to strengthen real-life friendships that actually nurture mental health and prevent the harm and risk associated with Facebook's antisocial behaviours. These repercussions of the social media network are significant reasons why it is highly advisable that users should disconnect and unfriend Facebook. Thank you.
Call upon the first negative speaker, Shafane Lou.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Chairman, Timekeeper. The topic for our debate tonight is that we should unfriend Facebook. To add to the definition provided by the affirmative team, to unfriend Facebook, we define it as to cut all contact with Facebook, direct or otherwise, permanently or for a specified amount of time. We, as in anyone who has an account with Facebook or has been associated with the website previously. Facebook being Facebook Inc., which is the social network service developed by Mark Zuckerberg and others, and it includes but is not limited to subsidiaries such as Instagram, Oculus VR, WhatsApp, and Messenger. As first speaker for the negative team, I am confident that this statement is false. I'll talk to you how Facebook connects people and how it is able to create jobs. There is also currently no exact alternative to Facebook that exists. Our second speaker will talk to you about why the issues with Facebook are not inherently a part of Facebook and can be easily fixed. Our third speaker will sum up and rebut our debate. Facebook, firstly to rebut some of the affirmative team's arguments, Facebook allows people to organize events as well as notify people of some of the events that they're interested in, such as in the timeline they customize your feed so that if you're interested in something, say electronics, they might show you an event that leads you to an electronics fair. This will allow you to establish more connections with other people. The dopamine-driven will, as the affirmative speaker has said, would still exist on all sides even if we unfriend Facebook, as people would need it to connect with others. Facebook has already implemented a technique to prevent identity fraud, as the first speaker has brought up. It requires a government ID to be sent to Facebook after the site has detected suspicious activity, and this algorithm that they have developed is extremely sensitive to your account activities, such as if you search up a few names on the website which you have previously not associated with, it will flag your account and require government ID. Facebook only acts as a medium for the bullying that happens online. Unfriending it would only cause the predators to move elsewhere onto other platforms. Now to my first point, connections. Facebook allows people to establish global connections, regardless if you're in Europe, the Americas, Asia, Australia. If you have access to the internet, you can connect using Facebook. Using data available from Facebook themselves, 92% of the 2.3 billion users can be connected in 5 or less steps. This means that any user picked at random can be connected through just 5 steps or 5 different users in between. This was originally theorized by Frigyes Kaufmann and was known as the 6 degrees of separation. He goes to state that any 2 people picked at random will be connected in just 6 steps. Tested by Harvard psychologist Stanley Milgram in the 1960s, he distributed packages to people around the world and got them to send them to Kevin Bacon. However, they couldn't send it directly to Kevin Bacon. They had to send it to someone they knew on a first-name basis. From this experiment, he has deduced that the lowest Kevin Bacon number, which is the amount of steps it takes to reach Kevin Bacon from any given person, is 6. However, Facebook has reduced this down to 5, as seen with the survey of 2.3 billion people, showing that it has indeed connected people. Leading to the second point, connecting businesses to consumers. Businesses usually require designers and software engineers to create a website for their online presence. This requires considerable time and energy, time and money to be invested into their online presence, which may be prohibitive for small businesses or freelancers. However, Facebook has a business page that you can set up easily, and Facebook has a business page that you can set up easily without spending any money on upkeep. Even with sites like Wix and Squarespace that don't require any designers, it still requires money for the upkeep. It allows an online presence without monetary upkeep, as I've mentioned before, and the design template is already there. There's no need to customize it. As said, Facebook has already made people much more connected than previously, and this combined with the fact that businesses have a truly free platform allows small businesses to grow their customer base. If we were to unfriend Facebook, all of these benefits would be lost. Not only would small businesses lose their revenue, jobs may be lost in businesses who can't afford an online presence and thus cannot sell their products. My third point is that how nothing currently offers Facebook services to the extent that Facebook does currently. So here's just a short list of some of the popular social media websites. Twitter currently has a character count and there's no instant messaging. Instagram is currently owned by Facebook and requires an image. Snapchat does not have a feed or like a timeline that you can scroll through. Reddit has extremely underdeveloped UI and a messaging service. It's more like mail and messaging. It looks a lot like the late 2000s, if anyone remember those. Skype and Discord is only dedicated to instant messaging, and there's no post or feed as mentioned with Snapchat, and Hangouts has an extremely low user count. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we should not unfriend Facebook, since this would disconnect businesses, disconnect you from your friends, from contacts with the rest of the world. Despite attempts, currently no social media sites can provide a service that's the same or even similar to Facebook. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Jessica Dickinson.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chairman. The topic for tonight's debate is that we should unfriend Facebook, and we, the affirmative team, believe this statement to be true. Our first speaker, Rachel, has discussed the effects of Facebook's use on people's mental health, as well as the antisocial behaviour that such an app promotes. I will be talking to you about how Facebook's environment is an unsafe place for users due to the complete lack of privacy. Facebook's tracking and experimentation on its users is unethical in itself, but this information is then applied back to the users in an attempt to manipulate their everyday choices. I would also like to reiterate that we agree with the opposition's amendment to the definition. Now, before I begin my arguments, I would like to address the flawed points of the first negative speaker. He argued that there is no alternative to Facebook in terms of global connectivity. This is a false statement, and the risks and privacy breaches are no fair trade for a connectivity which can be achieved through other more specific applications like LinkedIn for professional relationships or emails for something more personal. His reference to the 6 degrees of separation being reduced down to 5 degrees of separation through Facebook is it's irrelevant to this argument, especially as he provided no evidence to prove that this is due to Facebook. Now, although Facebook is not necessarily a direct cause of bullying, as he may have suggested, it is clearly a breeding ground for this sort of behaviour, and as with the evidence that Rachel suggested, that girl Jessica who committed suicide, there were a lot of pieces of evidence from Facebook. Facebook provided that situation for that to happen. Now, onto my arguments. First and foremost, Facebook's vast collection of user data is unparalleled. And as a public company, Facebook has a lot to gain from the meticulous monitoring of users' online and offline actions. According to Facebook's data policy, they not only collate every piece of information entered into the website, but also have access to the whereabouts of users at all times, the apps users have open and spent time on, the shopping habits of users, and via other advertisers, app developers, and publishers, Facebook also has information regarding the offline actions of users and non-users of the site. This is according to Facebook's data policy again. In addition to the data collection outlined in the Facebook privacy policy, Facebook has also used other means to collect data on its users, conducting several secret experiments over the years. The most notorious of these was a 2012 study which controlled how the posts in a person's newsfeed may affect their emotions. The experiment was a week long, and according to Forbes journalist Kashmir Hill, used some 680,000 subjects. The study involved filling the newsfeeds of some users with inherently positive posts and others with inherently negative posts. Facebook did not inform these users about this experiment until after it had taken place. And despite their hasty excuses relating to vague privacy statements or increasing the personalisation of Facebook, the act was an incredible breach of privacy. That one company has such significant control over the emotions of the world is yet another reason why Facebook users should cease to use the site and have their personal life exploited. This was not the extent of these experiments, however. Facebook's history with US election tampering began in 2010 with a sample size of 61,279,316 users offering an I voted button at the top of the test subjects' Facebook profiles, showing also which of their Facebook friends had voted. The study found that those with the button were more likely to vote, and even more likely if their friends also had. Although encouraging citizens to vote is admirable, the ability to choose which users are persuaded enters serious society-controlled territory. Many critics have pointed out that this process could allow Facebook to swing votes in a particular direction, a concern which is emphasised by the open political opinions of CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who quotes that immigration reform was one of the biggest civil rights issues of our time, and could hence possibly only encourage voters who agreed with these beliefs. Again, none of the users were made aware that they were part of an experiment, and that Facebook would be analysing voting records for their names. It is clear that a corporation like Facebook should not have such power over such a significant proportion of the world, and yet our participation as users is precisely what provides Facebook with a product to profit from. And our only way to combat this is for Facebook users to stop using Facebook. It is in the best interest of users to stop using Facebook, and hence we should unfriend the site. My next argument is the second half of this problem, how this information is then used, which is, in the case of Facebook, again, unethical. Facebook's most recent scandal involved Cambridge Analytica, a psychometrics firm which uses people's data to influence their opinions both politically and commercially. From 2014 to early this year, Facebook had been sharing its users' data with the company, creating a collection of personally identifiable information of, according to The Guardian, at least 87 million Facebook users. Cambridge Analytica's website states that they use data to change audience behaviour and boast a 100% track record of success in this endeavour. Not only did Facebook seriously invade the privacy of 87 million of its users to a degree which allowed Cambridge Analytica to create detailed psychographical profiles of the subjects of the data, but this data was then used to literally manipulate the subjects' choices. CEO of Cambridge Analytica, Alexander Nix, said the company ran over 4,000 campaigns for Donald Trump that in total captured over 1 billion impressions or views. And so Facebook's data leak could clearly have had a massive impact on the results of the 2016 US election. Facebook's use of our data is frankly unethical, and we should not trust a company which repeatedly profits from the exploitation of our information. Ladies and gentlemen, Facebook is a disturbingly intelligent network of each of its users' own lives, collating our every move and profiting from our personalities. Through each of its weak excuses, Facebook continues to exploit the information of its users and conduct experiments without informed consent. To regain this privacy that we have lost through the use of the site, we as Facebook users should unfriend Facebook. To quote Richard Stallman, American programmer and free software movement activist, Facebook is not your friend. It is a surveillance engine.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Hanson Milan.
Chairman, timekeeper. The topic for tonight's debate is that we should unfriend Facebook. Now, of course, we as a negative team disagree with this statement. Our first speaker has covered why how Facebook connects people and is good for business and is not equal by any other social media platform currently available. I will be covering why the use of private information by Facebook is not inherently a bad thing. Before I do that, I'd first like to address some of the points made by the affirmative team. So their first speaker criticized a lot of the social aspects and the social issues with Facebook. However, they failed to address the benefits to businesses, as our first speaker covered. The first speaker also focused on the effect of Facebook and cyberbullying on teenagers. However, as we defined "we" within the topic, it refers to everyone using Facebook currently. Of course, not everyone on Facebook is a teenager being cyberbullied, and so that does not qualify, does not validate the extreme response of everyone on Facebook currently leaving the platform. Their second speaker mentioned the problem with privacy and the use of private information by Facebook. Although privacy may be a big concern, with a social media platform, there must be some balance between privacy and publicity. Because it is a social media platform sharing between people, there is no way users can be 100% private, and so there must always be some risks for this to be a platform that is successful in its purpose. Their second speaker also stated that our first speaker failed to provide evidence for his 5 degrees of separation argument. According to the Facebook statistics, any 2 Facebook users picked at random has a 92% chance of being able to contact each other with less than 5 other users in between them. In that, if I knew someone, they would know someone who knew that person. Only with 5 people in the middle. And of course, this was a relevant argument in that it demonstrates the level of connectivity that Facebook has brought to their users. Now, so onto my first point: the use of information by Facebook. Now, a major use of information by Facebook is the implementation of targeted advertising. Now, targeted advertising is not inherently a bad thing. From an advertiser's point of view, they are marketing directly to their target market. So everyone they market towards has a higher chance of needing and wanting to buy their product. And so, of course, they get a better return on their investment of the advertisement. From a user perspective, they are provided an opportunity to extend their connections with local and possibly international businesses to provide services that they require. And so it's a win-win situation with targeted ads. Additionally, if users really don't want targeted ads, they have now implemented an option in the settings of Facebook to just simply turn off targeted advertisement. So there is really no issue with targeted advertisement with Facebook. Now, there have been some breaches of privacy that involve the platform of Facebook. However, we can use the recent scandal of Cambridge Analytica as an example to show that Facebook is not the primary benefactor, or not even primary. Facebook does not play a role in the breach of the privacy of their users. So, for the recent Cambridge Analytica scandal, a researcher named Alexander Coag made an app that you access through Facebook. Through that app, and people who access that app, he was able to gain access to their private or their information on Facebook. More than that, he also accessed the information of their friends on Facebook. Now, their friends, having never gone onto this app, never consented to having their information accessed. So, of course, this information was then given to Cambridge Analytica, who then passed it on to be used within Donald Trump's presidential campaign. However, the fact remains that through accessing their users' information and then passing it on to a third party, they broke the terms and conditions of Facebook. So this breach was not, it was not a case of Facebook giving information to a third party. It was the case of a third party coming in, exploiting Facebook to then gain access to that information. And of course, this is not an integral flaw within Facebook, but it is a flaw within the design of Facebook. However, it is a flaw that is easily fixed. And of course, this flaw has been fixed. Recently, Facebook has announced a new privacy policy that addresses many of the problems that have been brought to their attention within the recent events. Cambridge Analytica used facial recognition technology to access the data of the user's friends within Facebook. So Facebook uses facial recognition to alert users that someone else has posted a picture of them. And of course, through this, people can access their friends' Facebook profiles. So they have now changed this service to an opt-in. So beforehand, people had to opt out of this service. Now, people must be aware of and consent to this service for it to apply to them. So this, of course, would reduce the risks and almost eliminate the chances of this event happening again. Facebook has also implemented a new rule that 13 to 15-year-olds must have parental consent for them to receive targeted advertisement and personalized content. And they also need parental consent for them to post political and controversial statements. As well as that, Facebook has made steps to change their user privacy interface to be much more friendly to users, so they can then go into their Facebook, change the settings, and change and manage their own information. If they want to do, they could even download and have a look at what Facebook is doing with their information. So of course, Facebook has shown that they are capable of change and that they can fix the problems that currently exist within Facebook. So rather than leaving Facebook
affirmative speaker, George Thomas.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair and fellow debaters. The topic for tonight's debate is that we should unfriend Facebook, and as the affirmative team, we strongly agree with this statement. The first negative speaker has stated that Facebook can allow you to organise events, therefore allowing you to establish more social connections. However, we have made it clear that these are not genuine connections and that this connectivity is not always a positive. As our first speaker, Rachel, stated, the human brain has a cap on the amount of friends it can handle, and these connections require real-life connections to maintain. The real-life connections nurture the mental health, as the study by the American Journal of Preventative Medicine found that increased time on Facebook resulted in a greater degree of social isolation. Our first speaker, Rachel, discussed this in depth, and that becomes clear that even though Facebook can allow you to organise events, these do not necessarily entail real social connections and can increase that further sense of social isolation that our first speaker has discussed. And while Facebook can allow you to organise events, and this could be considered a positive use of the platform, these events can also be organised through other independent means, such as text or email, which are a lot more personal in communication, a lot more private, and can allow you to really connect and invite only those you can maintain those real social connections with. First negative speaker also stated that Facebook has employed mechanisms to prevent against identity fraud, making users provide government ID following detection of suspicious activity. However, this is clearly not a mechanism that is effective enough. Those committing identity fraud may not always or necessarily emit suspicious activity that will be picked up by Facebook. So we are still leaving people vulnerable to intelligent thieves that may want to steal your identity for purposes. And so by Facebook putting these in place, it is not necessarily protecting users enough. Additionally, this is new information introduced by the first negative speaker, and he has not cited a source or any evidence to confirm that this is indeed reliable, so therefore it can be disregarded in a sense. The first negative speaker also stated that Facebook is just one medium and one facilitator of cyberbullying, and that this can and will occur through other means. However, our first speaker, Rachel, acknowledged this and stated that although suicides caused by cyberbullying are not directly Facebook's fault, the social media giant offers instant messaging and commenting facilities which facilitate this sort of antisocial behaviour that we see. She also stated that while many of these crimes can occur off of Facebook, unfriending Facebook reduces the likelihood of individuals falling victims to these crimes and to an extent can eliminate the anonymity. So while these cyberbullying and bullying crimes might occur elsewhere and on other platforms, unfriending Facebook can help contribute to a reduction in these crimes occurring. So to throw that statement away because cyberbullying will still occur on other platforms and then we should unfriend Facebook does not make sense, because our first speaker, Rachel, has clearly stated that although it will occur on other platforms, unfriending Facebook will cause a reduction in these, and by removing yourself from Facebook, you have a zero chance of falling victim to cyberbullying on Facebook. The first negative speaker also discussed features of other social media networks such as Twitter, Snapchat and Reddit, and how these differ in their marketing to audiences and facilities that they have compared to Facebook and how they interact with users. However, we have clearly stated in our definition that although it may be beneficial to similarly unfriend other social media outlets, that their positive and negative effects do not influence this debate as it is focused exclusively on Facebook. So therefore that renders this argument invalid on the basis that it contradicts the definition that both the teams have agreed on. So to state the features that other social media platforms provide that Facebook does or does not work in the context of the debate, because we're focused solely on Facebook and not comparing Facebook to other social media platforms. The second negative speaker said that targeted advertising is not necessarily a bad thing. However, targeted advertising for the benefit of businesses should not come at the expense of the privacy of the user. Just because users may opt out of targeted ads does not mean that their data is not being provided to businesses. As our second speaker, Jess, made clear, Facebook has had extensive issues with privacy in the past, and so there is a possibility of this occurring again. And targeted ads should not be a benefit to businesses at the expense of the privacy of the user. If a user does not consent to having their information given out to businesses or sold to businesses by a platform that they are on, then that is not okay. And targeted advertising is not necessarily a good thing either. The second negative speaker also discussed the access of Facebook users' information gained through a third-party app that you had to have access to Facebook to be used, and in conjunction with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But this is indicative of Facebook's poor privacy maintenance and exhibits that users' information is not necessarily protected as well as it should be. For a third-party app to be able to access and hack into this information that users have on Facebook, then that is very indicative of Facebook's poor privacy standards, as have been discussed by Jess in their ability to manipulate and give out users' information is clearly not secure enough that a third party cannot access it. And while Facebook may have introduced a new privacy policy, as the second negative speaker stated, Facebook's past privacy issues discussed by our second speaker, Jess, show that Facebook still retains power to breach this against users' knowledge and sell it off to third parties like they did with Cambridge Analytica, or allow it to be accessed by third parties in an unsafe way that does not benefit the user at all. So to cite that this was accessed through a third party and not necessarily directly through Facebook does not have a logical outcome, as this is just purely indicative of Facebook's poor privacy standards and shows that Facebook cannot necessarily be trusted even in the future because their past privacy issues indicate a history and potentially a future of this. And while we can't confirm whether or not there will be more privacy breaches in the future, their history alone is enough for many users to decide that it is time for them to unfriend Facebook. And because third parties have come into it, that is perhaps even worse than Facebook accessing their own users' information, as Facebook does not necessarily have a means of understanding what the third parties' intentions are with the information that they will sell it to businesses for targeted advertising. Even if Facebook has an opt-out maneuver, then perhaps these third parties are accessing that information and then selling it off, and that is something that allows businesses to get around the privacy policies of Facebook and manipulate users in a way that is not okay without their consent. Ladies and gentlemen, we should be facing our problems instead of Facebooking them. Our first speaker, Rachel, discussed the negative, addictive effects Facebook has on the mental health and psychological well-being of its users, as well as the dangerous antisocial behaviours such as cyberbullying and identity fraud that are promoted by the app's use. Our second speaker, Jess, spoke to you about the extreme lack of privacy that Facebook grants its users, and discussed the unethical tracking and experimentation that Facebook has used to manipulate its users and their choices. To quote contemporary British novelist Zadie Smith, "When a human being becomes a set of data on a website, like Facebook, he or she is reduced. Everything shrinks. Individual character, friendships, language, sensibility. For these reasons, we should unfriend Facebook." Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, James Walter.
To go straight into my rebuttal, the third speaker has tried to point out to you that many flaws in Facebook exist. Flaws exist in any program, nothing is perfect. However, Facebook has many initiatives and algorithms, which granted, not all of which work, but they are improving this. They are trying to improve this. They need to improve this. Many sanctions against them by the US government and other government bodies have insisted that if Facebook can be continued allowed to be working and existing in their country, they must improve their privacy policy. And because of this, Facebook has introduced several initiatives for hackers and other third parties by rewarding them for finding those flaws and telling Facebook about these. These include monetary rewards up to and including $500 per flaw. Going back to their first speaker, which has been reiterated by our second and third speaker, however, their statement of Facebook allows cyberbullying is correct. And granted, their initial definition did insist that we not use all other social media sites. The private messaging, which I assume is what they use, because any other forms of contact between Jessica and her bullies would have been public and open to outside intervention, is a widely used format for many other programs, and private messaging is not one of Facebook's main functions. The second speaker tried to tell you that Facebook's targeted advertising and unethical experiments could have influenced the US election. They very specifically said could have several times, but they didn't actually draw anything that was completely conclusive, which means although it could have, it doesn't mean it necessarily did. And the US voting booths are already set up to manipulate voters by reducing the amount of booths in the area. They can dissuade people from voting because in the US the voting is not compulsory, as well as targeted campaigns for specific senators and prime ministers in areas, because targeted advertising for specific audiences exists without Facebook, because their data isn't only available on Facebook. Yes, so going back to this, continuing with that, the second speaker mentioned several times that Facebook was manipulating its users, though never clearly specified the negative manipulation that was occurring. We assume that the targeted advertising is what they were referring to, which, as I've just stated, exists in many other forms all around the world in different situations, such as surveys and socioeconomic backgrounds and censuses. The affirmative team's second and third speaker kept reinstating that Facebook's event organizing capabilities weren't necessarily a positive attribute of it, as there is a mental cap of how many friends a person can possibly have or can effectively have. But they never specified how big this cap was. Can it be that we can have 1,000 close friends, 500, 100? Because it's so good at organizing events, Facebook is so good at organizing events, its ability to set up meetings between people in the real world and physically interact with them creates opportunities that media such as emails and text will just not be able to accomplish at the same level. Although their mention of using text messaging and emails directly interferes with their initial statement that we should ignore all other networking sites because, they don't influence Facebook at all. If we need to unfriend Facebook, we will need an alternative, which was stated by our first and second speaker today. Our first speaker, Shifang, tried to tell you that Facebook is the best available social networking site available. Other social networking sites exist, though they are not as successful for a multitude of reasons. Facebook helps connect people with other people, helps businesses connect with people through targeted advertising. And although some may consider this unethical and a breach of privacy, targeted advertising helps users find things that they're more interested in rather than something that they would never need to use, and so that space is wasted on them, which makes businesses more successful and links people directly to their products, to products that interest them and benefit them. Our second speaker, Hansen, covered a reiterated that targeted ads aren't bad, and Facebook's problems can be fixed, and they are attempting to fix them. So in conclusion, let's work with the devil we know rather than creating a new one.